A government can set a minimum wage, a minimum crop price, or another legal floor under a price. The idea sounds simple. Do not let the price fall below this point. But once a floor is above the market level, behavior starts changing. A price floor is a legal minimum price. It matters only when the minimum sits above the price buyers and sellers would have reached on their own. At that point, the rule changes the deal. Sellers want to supply more, buyers may want less, and the gap between them becomes the real issue. Minimum wage is the easiest version to picture. If the legal wage rises above what some employers plan to pay, workers who keep their jobs may earn more. But some employers may also cut hours, hire more slowly, raise prices, or automate tasks. The policy changes behavior on both sides. Legal minimum price matters because it changes what looks reasonable in this specific setting. In how price floors work, the person may feel they are reacting freely, while legal minimum price and surplus when quantity supplied exceeds quantity demanded have already narrowed the path. The danger is judging the policy only by the higher legal price. A higher wage or crop price can help the person receiving it, but the market also reacts through hiring, output, prices, storage, substitution, or enforcement. The real analysis has to include both the gain and the adjustment. A farm price support shows a different side of the same idea. If the government guarantees a high crop price, farmers may produce more than consumers want to buy at that price. The result can be surplus, storage costs, or public purchases that were not visible in the first promise. The legal minimum is only powerful when it is binding. If the floor is below the natural market price, it is mostly symbolic. If it is above the market price, it can create a gap between what sellers want to supply and what buyers are willing to buy. Timing changes the risk. Early checks are cheap. Late checks often arrive after money, trust, paperwork, or emotional energy has already been committed. The buyer side is easy to ignore. A wage floor affects employers buying labor. A crop floor affects consumers or governments buying output. If the buyer reduces demand, the benefit promised to sellers may be smaller or more uneven than expected. Farm price support shows why the trade-off cannot be judged by the guaranteed number alone. If farmers produce more because the minimum price is attractive, the extra crops may not disappear naturally. Someone has to buy them, store them, export them, destroy them, or redesign the policy. Enforcement and exceptions often hides in the details of price floors. In how price floors work, it may sit inside enforcement and exceptions, so the warning sign is easy to miss until the consequence is already moving. Enforcement decides whether the rule exists in practice. Without enforcement, some employers or buyers may work around the floor through informal discounts, unpaid hours, side payments, or reduced quality. A rule on paper is not the same as a rule that changes behavior. Who benefits and who loses deserves attention near the end of the chain. In how price floors work, it can decide whether the outcome becomes manageable or turns into the more difficult version of the problem. The human reaction is part of the mechanism. Fear, relief, pride, shame, urgency, or loyalty can change the way facts are handled. A strong explanation connects the visible event with the cause underneath it. Without both parts, the answer either feels shallow or too abstract. The practical step is to check the point where the result can still change. That may be a price, a document, a term, a conversation, or a deadline. Price floors can also create illegal side deals. If buyers do not want to pay the official minimum, they may look for discounts, bundled arrangements, or informal ways around the rule. That is another reason enforcement matters. To use the idea, follow quantity after the floor is introduced. More supply, less demand, unsold goods, fewer hours, or higher consumer prices reveal the trade-off more clearly than the legal minimum by itself. The main takeaway is to look beyond the first explanation. The first explanation may be comfortable, but the real cause is often more specific. A floor can be paired with other policies. For example, training support, tax relief, public purchasing, or targeted credits can reduce some side effects. The floor itself is only one part of the design. For price floors, the strongest protection is preparation before pressure rises. Handling price floors early can prevent the messier version later, especially when a legal minimum price that buyers are unwilling to pay is already becoming possible. One reason price floors are controversial is that the benefits are concentrated and the costs are scattered. A worker who receives a higher wage can point to a clear gain. A consumer paying slightly more, or an employer hiring more slowly, may experience the cost in a less visible way. If the goal is farm stability, policymakers must decide what to do with excess production. Buying surplus, limiting output, or storing goods all carry costs that must be included in the evaluation. The next time this topic appears, focus on the detail that actually changes the outcome. That is where better judgment begins. Price floors also interact with market power. In a weak labor market, a wage floor may protect workers from very low offers. In a fragile small business, the same rule may force hard choices about staffing, hours, or prices. The local context matters. The clearest way to understand a price floor is to ask what happens to quantity. If sellers want to supply more and buyers want less at the legal price, the gap between them is the central problem. A price floor only changes the market when it sits above the natural market price. If the legal minimum is below what buyers and sellers already use, nothing much changes. The policy becomes important when it forces buyers to pay more than they otherwise would and encourages sellers to supply more than buyers want. Minimum wage is the most familiar example. A higher wage floor can raise income for workers who keep their jobs. At the same time, some employers may reduce hiring, raise prices, automate tasks, or cut hours. The real debate is not whether higher pay sounds good, but how the labor market adjusts. Agricultural price floors can create surplus. If farmers are guaranteed a high price, they may produce more. If consumers buy less at that price, the extra output has to be stored, wasted, exported, or purchased by the government. The floor solves one problem while creating another. A price floor also affects people who never appear in the headline. A worker who gets a higher wage is visible. The worker not hired because the position disappeared is easier to miss. That does not automatically make the floor good or bad, but it shows why the full effect is harder than the promise. The strongest price floor analysis asks what happens at the margin. Which workers are helped, which jobs disappear, which buyers reduce demand, and whether public support is needed for the groups hurt by the adjustment. The practical question is who carries the trade-off. Workers, employers, taxpayers, consumers, and producers may all feel different parts of the policy. A price floor can help one group and burden another, so it should be judged by the full chain of effects, not by the first promise alone. One practical way to judge a price floor is to ask whether the policy includes support for the side effects. If higher wages reduce hours, or crop supports create surplus, the design needs a plan for those consequences.